Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon your time zone and when you're listening in. Today's webinar from Early Information Science is about master data management, personalization, building the data infrastructure to support orchestration. I'm here with Dan O'Connor, who is a senior product manager at InRiver. And Dan, I think people know who I am. I'm founder and CEO of Early Information Science. I've been in the business for over 25 years, and I recently wrote a book on AI and use of ontologies to power the organization. And I realized my headshot has expired. It's past its expiration date, so I do need to get that updated. I used to look like that. Sometimes in the right lighting, maybe. Dan, do you want to say words about your background?
Sure. I'm Dan O'Connor. I'm currently the senior product manager at InRiver, working at product visioning through the entire tool. But I've been in the taxonomy space and the data management space for about 15 years now, with a variety of different companies on the consulting side, the customer side, and on the solution side.
Yeah, and Dan, we've known each other for a number of years, and I've always appreciated your perspective. I'm really glad you can make it today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I want to thank our sponsor, CMS Wire. There's a great conference coming up in Austin that I'll be speaking at. And Marketing AI Institute. They're a terrific resource around AI. I have to wrangle a couple of other sponsorships. There's the Emerge, which is a wonderful company and also has great information. And there's a lot of good information sources. We also have some further reading at the back of the deck. We'll try to shoot for about 50 minutes so we have time for Q&A. And we have some polls, so really appreciate your participating in the polls. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the need for MDM, why it's important for personalization, the challenges around personalization, and look at these domains of master data. And we're going to focus on product content. And I know people don't think about content from a master data perspective, but we're going to talk about create once, publish everywhere, which is really critical to personalizing the experience. And it's critical to powering things like chatbots. And we can touch on some of the generative AI briefly in that context. We'll briefly touch on sales and financial, but that's not the focus. And we'll really get into the mechanics of personalization. Really, how should it work around recommendations of products, content, and marketing personalization, and then what to do to get started, where you should begin the process. So that's our agenda. Early information science, as I mentioned, we have been around for quite a long time. And really our catchphrase is making information more usable, more findable, more valuable. We've worked with a range of customers across industries and have about 50 consultants in our organization. Dan, do you want to talk about InRiver?
Sure. InRiver is a product information management tool. We're the first SaaS-based multi-tenant product information management tool. And basically, we want to manage the entire product journey from the inception of the data all the way through the monitoring of the data, all from one tool, so that it goes from the linear progress of launching a product all the way through to optimizing products being the primary focus of the tool. So we've been around for about 17 years, and we have offices around the globe.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we're going to get into exactly what you were talking about in just a couple of minutes. But I want to start with, where are you on your MDM journey? And I say initial investigation, POCs, pilots. I should probably have said you've tried it before and it's worked or not worked. Because when you think about it, yes, you can do some master data on a functional application, but it's not really master data for the enterprise. Or are you at enterprise-wide deployment, or none of the above? So if you could put that poll up, Carolyn, that would be great. Oh, you know what? I might have changed that. Okay, so initial investigation. Yeah, here we go. So go ahead and answer that question. Where are you? And if it's none of the above, go ahead and tell us what the situation is. Operationalize at department level. I see that. There's POCs and small scale pilots. Good. And then there's a couple of initial investigation, but we're neck and neck for enterprise-wide deployment and none of the above. So please let us know in the chat what doesn't apply to you. Again, I could have probably asked about successes and failures, because lots of organizations kind of embark on this, or they embark on it for a particular domain, or they do embark on it for a particular set of processes. But we're really looking at this, across the customer journey. That's how we're going to frame this. But go ahead and let us know. And it looks like, again, operationalized for departmental or functional applications. So thank you for your participation. I'm going to keep going here, but anything surprising to you, Dan, about that? Or is that?
No, MDM has been around for a long time, but the actual usages of MDM have really evolved in the last 8 to 9 years. And we'll talk about the comparisons to PIM in a little bit, but that's not surprising at all that people are at different levels in their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I think we shared the results, and now we will stop sharing the results and move on. Perfect. Thank you for that. So what is MDM? This is a Gartner definition, and I highlighted a couple of things in this definition. Master data management, where business and IT work together, right? It's not an IT problem. We're looking at semantic consistency of meaning and terminology. We're looking at how we can share data assets across the organization and make sure they're consistent, uniform, and they have identifiers and extended attributes that are aligned. Now, when you think about it, that can be product attributes, that can be customer attributes, that can be content attributes, right? Those are the things that need to also be aligned, and people don't think of content in that way. What's interesting here is they didn't put product data in here. So I was a little bit surprised about that. The customers, prospects, citizens, suppliers, sites, hierarchies. Maybe I could have dug a little deeper and found one that included that, but master data for product master is very, very important and very critical. So when you start thinking about, what's going on in organizations, the data ecosystem is very fragmented. Systems grow in complexity. There's acquisitions. A lot of times those acquisitions are not fully integrated or fully funded for integration. Many times we're going to leave that acquisition to their own devices. And that makes it more difficult to do things that are, things like cross-sell and upsell, or integrate catalogs, or integrate the experience. A lot of times when new systems are deployed, they don't follow a standard architecture. There's no gating process to look at how they're using, how they're defining the entities, or an application comes with the entities already defined, right? And so a lot of times there's no standard, but naming conventions can also be very ad hoc. You can have the same concept be referred to by different names in different systems, or we can have the same concept can mean different things in different systems. So it can be the same name, or different names in different systems, but it's the same idea, or the same idea that can have different meanings in different systems. So that's really problematic when it comes to master data. And then integration becomes very difficult and time intensive when you have to do a lot of manual processing, when you have to do extractions and translations and so on. Entities need to be mapped to do analysis, and all of this makes it much more difficult to get routine reports, and answers will then vary depending upon what's queried and who queries it and how they query it. And it's very much, it's almost impossible to get a 360-degree view of the customer. Any comments or thoughts on this slide?
Yeah. So people would normally align this with an in-house built system or systems. They look at this saying, well, okay, this is non-normalized just because it's an in-house built system. The minute you start looking at hub and spoke for any data system, there's going to be differences in the identifiers. There's going to be differences in the naming conventions, and that need for MDM doesn't go away just because you bought a tool versus built a tool. So it's very important to understand, especially when you're trying to build take an ad hoc system and connect it to a bot system. Not having an MDM can create challenges for how you're going to normalize those attributes.
I have a question here. Be curious to hear the panel's take on how well MDM truly handles and manages semantics, if indeed it does. The golden record doesn't necessarily add context to drive semantics or drive understanding. That's a really good point. And I think, you're trying to get, there's always going to be differences in context, and there will always be, depending upon the application, there's going to be a mental model of a user who will use one term to describe what they're looking for, and another user will use a different term to describe what they're looking for. Many times in search and retrieval, we have to harmonize that in some sort of thesaurus structure or some sort of knowledge graph to give us that context. Master data is really it's not necessary. I mean, it can help with the semantics, but it's not going to help with ad hoc semantics, so to speak. Dan, what are your thoughts on that question about semantic?
Definitely that's part of it. I think the other thing that has to be understood is there's MDM, the tool, and then there's MDM, the bigger part of data governance. And if you're looking at MDM to solve all of the semantic challenges, like you just talked about, Seth, it's going to be an expansive program to be able to do so. There's a diminishing returns concept, and understanding what you control from a data governance perspective to apply to the tool can help you understand which are the best semantic pieces to go after from an MDM perspective.
Right. And I think this is all driven very much by use cases, because again, it comes back to what is the user trying to do and where do we find those semantic inconsistencies. But it's a very good point that was brought up by the question, and that was Doug. Thank you, Doug, for that insightful question. The symptoms are we don't have a consistent view of customers, our customer data is a mess, product data is incomplete, product catalog difficult to navigate, attribute data does not reflect what customers are looking for, customer support team can't get answers, we don't know why customers convert, it's difficult to collect metrics because each system has a different way of describing touch points. Those are just some symptoms. Do you want to articulate any others, Dan, or do you have some color commentary on this type?
Essentially, the more you try to interconnect different domains, the more these exact problems are going to come forth. So connecting product data when it's incomplete to customer data is going to be extremely difficult, unless you have an MDM solution that can get you to a point of not just defining the data, but defining complete as well.
That's a great point. And we will talk about the whole idea of data quality and how we need to measure data quality. We need to have an alignment between the data quality and a process it supports so that we can justify things. Now, we hear people say, well, we're using AI for personalization. Okay, that's a pretty broad statement. I love hearing that when business users say, we're just going to use AI. Okay, well, AI is only as good as the data that powers the algorithm, right? Now, with generative AI, like ChatGPT, if it does not have the answer, it will make one up, right? It's called hallucination. The tool will give you an answer that is reasonable, that sounds appropriate, but it is in fact completely incorrect. So we need the data. There are ways to integrate large language models with specialized language models, but it doesn't obviate the need to manage those assets and manage the data and manage the content appropriately. And it really depends on understanding the user in detail, who they are, what do they need, how do they think about the problems they're trying to solve. We understand that mental model. Then we give them products, content, information dependent upon that model. Now, to do so, we have to align the descriptors of the customer with the products and the content. And this is where, again, you need to have that source of truth, that ground truth, that reference data in order to do these things. Again, the algorithm is only as good as the data inputs, and we don't see any mechanism right now to get around the human judgment that is required to start to do some of this stuff. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but AI is great, but AI is a tool. It's not a solution. Okay, so when you're trying to build these large data sets using AI, it doesn't replace the need for processes to be able to, as Seth said, make sure that the data is accurate, it's consistent. AI can't tell the difference between information and misinformation. So I've seen examples, I won't go into them right now, where using AI has led to not incorrect answers, but out of context answers. And as this becomes a part of your branding message, you have to make sure that the message stays on target. That will always require a human until we get to the point that AI can build the trust to know that it's the solution, not just a tool towards the solution.
Right. So, and it does take knowledge of what customers need. It takes knowledge of their requirements, of the solutions, of what they've tried before. There's a lot of things that go behind personalization, and human knowledge and judgment is critical to this. Some of you may have seen this animation before, but I'm going to walk through, when you think about the product data, the content, the customer journey, the knowledge and expertise of the organization, when you start to onboard products, whether you're doing product development or you're onboarding products, lots of things happen in parallel. You're doing demand generation. You're doing, you need product catalog operations, but you also need to have marketing calendars and branding guidelines and branding strategy and different types of messaging and looking at how messaging is working with the customer. That has to be integrated into your content strategy. We need to understand what's happening with promotions when we get feedback from the marketplace and according to customer segment. We also have to provision customer self-service, right? We need to make sure that people have the content and the information they need to help solve problems. We need to also provision customer support when they do need to call in, and obviously we want to deflect as much of that. But internal audiences need to be able to find and share and reuse content and data and insights to support that external experience, right? So there's a lot of moving parts here, and that means that we need maturity and capabilities in content optimization. That is one of the areas. Content operations is very, very important. We need to have maturity in product information management and be able to have catalog operations and product information management capabilities. We need to be able to understand that customer journey in great detail and understand their digital body language and their mindset. And of course, we need to collaborate up and down the food chain and share knowledge and insights about the customer and activate those insights. And that's where we have personalization. Personalization is a combination of many different things that have to be done in order for us to understand that customer and present the right information for them to help them in their journey. Their customer journey is a knowledge journey. They're always looking for answers. And we're trying to make recommendations. We're trying to reduce the cognitive load on the human in order to help them through that journey. Dan, your thoughts on this type of scenario?
We'll get into it in a few slides, but really understanding that this isn't a one-time set it and forget it is also important. You need to be constantly tuning, not just your AI that you're using for personalization, but even your data needs to be tuned. And we'll talk about some strategies for that.
That's right. And we need to have those constant feedback loops. So again, we need customer experience maturity. We need content optimization, product data maturity, knowledge process maturity. We have maturity models for all these things. And then they're monitored by metrics and governance and to understand ROI, to understand course corrections. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail a little later. Here's another poll that we have. Which areas are most important to your project or organization at this point? Product master data, content structure and optimization, customer master data, financial master data, or something else. So Carolyn, can you put that poll up? Let's start seeing how that comes about. Oh, interesting. Content is right up there. Customer, product at the top. Yep, not unexpected. And then content. Wow. I usually don't hear people talking a lot about the need to optimize content in the context of master data and personalization. So it's good to see it's on that radar. So let us know in the Q&A tab if there's something else.
And just a comment on that. I think product has become more important to companies going forward, just simply because the tools that are out there are meant to visualize the data that you're showing. But if the data isn't correct, you can't correct it in the display set. Okay, you're not going to get a tool that's going to correct the data coming from a source of truth after it's left the source of truth. So getting product and content data right has become much more important because that is your brand message. Right.
And it is fundamental to get that right at the source, because as you say, there's lots of downstream applications and downstream systems. Okay, so those are the results of that poll. Again, we were tied for product data and content structure and organization, which is very interesting. So let's continue on. So Dan, I think this is
Yep.
your slide here.
So when we're talking product data maturity in terms of being able to personalize, there's the collection element to be able to make product data work. You'll see we just have an example slide here of a tractor that might come in a couple of variants. And we have all of the content that's going to be associated to it, the images, the documents, the user's guides, the CAD drawings. All of that is standard across the product data maturity systems. All of the systems handle this. But as you try to get deeper into those maturity curves, if you can click, Seth, what you're going to see is the upsells then cross-sells start to become more important. And sometimes you need to be able to curate them. Sometimes you just need to be able to build data sets off of it. Service parts and bundles become part of that, because in the service parts industry, just being able to provide a part that replaces another part generates generally about 20% returns for incorrect usage of the parts. People are buying the wrong things. Having a data model that supports a larger set of data maturity options makes it so that you have more data inputs into your AI, but it also allows you to disseminate this information consistently. So if we go to the next slide, we start off at what a PIM is meant to do, what a product information management tool is meant to do. It's meant to be a single source of truth for product information. Sounds pretty standard. It is marketing focused. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have non-marketing attributes, but it's marketing focused so that you can set up a single marketing message across all the usages of that data. And then its primary purpose is to syndicate that data to all the sales and marketing channels that data needs to be represented in, whether it's an e-tailer, whether it's a marketplace, whether it's a client's own website. We want that consistent messaging from the PIM to be presented. Now, in contrast, when you look at MDM, you still see it's a single source of truth, but for multiple domains. And what you're doing is you're managing the internal data to standardize and aggregate all of that data into a source of truth that you can reuse, but not just from that marketing focus. And MDM, as I said before, is both a set of tools and processes as part of a data governance process with the goal of standardizing data, standardizing the usage of terminology, standardizing those semantics that you talked about. A lot of people will look at this and say, well, why would you have a PIM versus an MDM? You need both. They have a focus for standardizing data for different use cases. There are MDM tools out there that offer a product domain, but you would never put a customer domain into a PIM. It's not what its specialty is. And there's pieces that a PIM can do that an MDM can't do, and vice versa. So they really complement each other as opposed to being in contrast. Do you have anything to add to that, Seth?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And, a lot of times people look at things like customer data platforms to consolidate the signals from customers, right? That is, you still need a customer master, but then you're also doing things that are real time and near real time, which we're going to talk about shortly. That's really outside of the scope of an MDM, right? A tool, a CDP, customer data platform, can take real-time signals and change that digital body language. But I have not seen MDM tools in the customer domain to able to do that. Maybe I just haven't surveyed the market enough, but I still see it's kind of similar to your analogy here that, a CDP, and I could have probably put a slide in on that, is analogous to PIM, whereas an MDM for customer domain is really going to have that customer master, but not necessarily going to take in the responses to marketing campaigns or whether they're clicking through on something that is really outside of the domain of master data.
So we talked about before optimization of data, and the standard way that most tools look is in a linear fashion. You find a source for the data, you pass it through a system, in this case it's a PIM, could be an MDM tool, and then you disseminate it somewhere. And for personalization, we talked about that continued optimization. What we really want to have is a circular reference point where you can launch a product, but using tools to be able to analyze that data either on your own website, through your own systems, or on external systems, that gives you an idea of what's practically in the market as opposed to what's objectively in your tool, allows you to begin the process of optimization. Now, when we use a PIM, we talk about it allows you to use inheritance and reuse of data and other aspects to feed the launch cycle to get you to better analysis to optimize those records in whatever system that happens to be needed to be optimized in. But you need a structure like this to keep up with the personalization pieces, or your product data can get stale in a channel where it is no longer contextually correct. And then you're losing the advantages of your updating and your personalization.
It's terrific. And I totally agree that it's a cyclical process and, it's continual improvement, continual adjustments, continual remediation. I have a comment here about content from Bernie. And Bernie says, unstructured content in our or most organizations represent about 70% of the information assets and is typically grossly ungoverned. So content structure and optimization is important. So I think that's a great observation. And organizations don't put the money into this because lots of reasons, right? They don't understand the return on investment, right? They don't understand what they're getting for the money. They can't tie it to a direct ROI. And there are ways to do that because you have to think, well, what is that content supporting? What is the process it's enabling? And then we need to get baselines on that. I don't recall whether I included that slide here or not, but I might just open it up on an ad hoc basis. And I think the same goes for a lot of companies are underinvested in product information because, they've have legacy catalogs and they've integrated different companies and they're not necessarily spending the money on optimizing this from the customer's perspective. What is your observation or experience on that? And again, content here can also be product related content, or it can be other types of content like support content and so on.
Right. Well, let's put it this way. We've all had that call from somebody at some point higher up in our company saying, why does this look like this on the website? And when are you going to be able to fix it? Mm-hmm. That's not just an ad hoc response. That's a sign that an MDM is needed to be able to start understanding all of those connection points. A PIM is needed for content, a CDP is needed for the customer data, but you still need that MDM to govern the rules that apply to that. So when you're getting those calls, each one of those is a signal that you have a master data management problem.
Yeah. And again, it requires enough visibility and investment so that executives understand why that needs to be done. I have another question here from Frida. What do you suggest doing when you need a performant PIM, but have a very complex product data structure in your MDM? Which one will be pivotal to adjust first to output customized content into different channels?
So from a PIM perspective, there's two choices, and all of the tools have gotten fairly mature in the way that they can handle complex data models. It really depends on a lot of, it depends on what's driving that complexity, whether the PIM needs that complexity inherited or the integration transforms that to a lighter data model, or if you want to pull that whole data model in for specific marketing purposes. The PIM should be central to that master data management strategy when you're talking about the published side of this equation, to make sure your marketing message on everything from your POS tapes and brick and mortar shelf tags all the way to your Amazon listings and your social. We want that consistent messaging. You do that by making sure that whatever that product model is in your MDM, you're bringing the right elements into the PIM tool. It shouldn't really be a PIM tool restraint at this point. There are still tools that only do parent-child relationships, and that's it. But the majority of PIM tools have the ability to do the type of data modeling you're looking for.
Yeah, and it's also important to think about the boundaries of an application, right? Some things are better at certain tasks than others, and it also depends how we're configuring them, and there can be overlap. So you kind of have to make the punishment fit the crime. What tool is most appropriate for that use case, right? And so everything should be use case driven. And if it is better, if it's functionality that requires very dynamic look at those products and merchandising and bundles and those types of things, you're not going to be able to do that in ERP because it's too locked down and it's very complex and very difficult to do that. But you have more ability to be more dynamic and be able to make those merchandising decisions and make those product relationships, which will help with that customer making a buying decision. And again, the question is should it live in the ERP or the MDM system? Should it live in the PIM? And again, there is overlap between these things, and you have to think about boundaries of the application. What's appropriate? You don't want to rebuild functionality that is better off in another tool. I could go on with that, but I think that's a major point here is that make sure that the tool is being used appropriately and use use cases to drive that. Now, again, in product and BM, we can enrich product data. It's sourced from multiple, can be sourced from multiple systems. We want to enrich with merchandising, marketing data. We need to populate attributes that enable a dynamic view of the product catalog. And this is just a quick example with an ontology management tool that we have that we use mostly internally. But I added metadata to the term, right? Terms are not just terms, they're objects, and they can have whatever metadata you want. And so what we can do is we can say, let's add audience metadata to the product catalog, and let's tag as appropriate who should see this information in a higher priority. Then we can use that to sort, right? We can say, let's prioritize by this particular audience. So if somebody comes in and they are a network engineer, they're going to first see the things that are related to a network engineer. It's a very simple way of doing dynamic product catalog, but it's the metadata on the metadata, right? It's thinking of it that way. You have a term, but the term is an object. The term can have lots of different metadata. And what we can do is we can put other identifiers and other pieces of information on that term in order to sort it a certain way, in order to prioritize and so on. And your thoughts?
Again, the idea of having this master data management is to have a standardized set of terms that you're working at. Your vocabulary should be managed appropriately. So this is great for being able to add that metadata upon metadata, but also make sure your metadata on metadata is controlled as well. Otherwise, you end up with wildly different results.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. This is just an illustration purpose, but I do want to, I have another question here that is related to strategy involving things like taxonomy and metadata and information architecture. And Sarah asked, what do you do when you see your organization making key mistakes regarding the overall strategy or involving something like a taxonomy that should flow across multiple systems? So you're seeing it, go in the wrong direction. You're trying to help redirect, but the question becomes, who has the voice, right, or the ear of the decision maker, and can you educate them as to what the appropriate approach is, or can you extrapolate what's going to happen if you go down the current path? It's a very difficult thing to do. Many times, marketing agencies may have the voice of a chief digital officer or another senior level person, or a consulting firm. And many times they're not thinking of this in the right way. They're not thinking of it from that long-term sustainability perspective, but they're also not looking at the other downstream applications. So it's a challenge to do that. And if other people have suggestions, please put that into the chat. But the idea is, what is the implication of that strategy if it's not correct? And can you present an alternative and project out what the outcomes would be, one path versus another? Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just tagging on to the end of that. Being able to come with a solution is much more important than coming with a problem. So if you're just questioning the strategy, as mentioned, like a taxonomy decision, it's better to come with a solution that you can A/B test and get data around to show a return or a risk than just to identify the problem. And this is in consulting. This is when you're working for a business. The best way to be able to get those kinds of things identified is to come with the solution first, not just the problem.
Right. That's a really good point, and show why that solution is better using the approach that you're thinking about. By the way, folks, if we didn't answer your question fully, you can ask follow-on questions or give us some feedback there. Or if you have recommendations or suggestions for others, please feel free to share those as well. So that was the idea of organizing the product hierarchy according to audience, and that's again a very simple way of doing personalization. It does require that we understand that customer, we understand that journey, we understand what's important to them, we understand their mental model, and so on. Now, when we start to think about this across domains, right? We have product data that is spread out in lots of different systems. And that's the question is, where is the product master? Where is it being held? Where is it being managed? Content, this is an even bigger problem, right? Because content is owned in silos. I'm going to talk about this more in a little bit, but it's all across these applications. And at least people have a better understanding of, well, I do need a product master, than understanding how to componentize and reuse content. So content is kind of the redheaded stepchild that does not get the attention. And then, of course, we have customer data, and the customer data can live in lots of different systems, lots of different processes. And then, of course, we have sales and order history, right? Where is all of this stuff living? And if I query these different systems and these different tools, I may get different results because they may not have consistent representations of these concepts. Your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, from this perspective, if you turn it around a little bit, when I was in consulting and when we go to customers now looking at their architecture, the first thing that we ask for is their architecture diagram. If they don't have one, the first activity is to build that architecture diagram, because you can't define where your customer master, your product master, your content master is if you don't understand the rest of the systems that are in the ecosystem.
And that's where you need to understand data flows and how to govern those different systems. Many times those systems will have different owners. Who represents the interest of the system owners, and aligns that with governance and decision-making and change management. So decision-making, change management for these systems is very, very important, so that because there's so many dependencies, and as Dan mentioned, you do need that architecture. You do need to understand that current state. I like to say, you can't automate what you don't understand. You can't automate a mess, right? I'm stealing my thunder from later on. But the point here is we have to look at each of these systems and understand the dependencies and understand the decision-making processes and the rules and the guidelines and the standards, and make sure that we have a way of ensuring or measuring compliance. So all of this is really important, to have that holistic view of customers and products and content. And so if I take this a step further and talk about the content problem, I have a lot of organizations that have different silos for creating content, right? They have support and they have marketing and they have engineering and sales, but then within those silos, there are more silos, there are more processes. And so we see lots of different content being spread out across the organization, whether you call it knowledge or content. And there's a fine line between content and knowledge, but we need to harvest human knowledge in order to generate the right content. And then we need to make decisions about how to surface that content in terms of answers and in terms of value. But now we're also seeing people do this, right? They're setting up, oh, we're going to do cognitive content or cognitive assistant content operations. But this is how this is going to play out down the road. When you start looking at how this is going to emerge, this is going to be a bigger mess, right? Because we'll have these domain-specific and silo-specific assistants, right? What we're looking for is conversational access to this content. And what really we should be doing is we should be doing consistent content creation and management, and have a create once, publish everywhere approach. Now, a lot of people say this is not practical, but this is very practical. With a large organization that we worked with for many years, set up their component authoring, the governance, the change management, the metadata structures, the workflows, and essentially they're able to serve up this content in truly throughout that value chain. They can use that same piece of content for channel partners, for distributors, for the website, for field service, for embedded knowledge within a product, for customer self-service, and for their bots, right? They have that content componentized for reuse. And they tell me they save hundreds of millions of dollars per year on this. Was it a big investment to get there? Yes. Did it take a long time? Yes. But they are 5 to 10 years ahead of the market, and they're serving up 2 million knowledge transactions per day using this approach. And again, it's very mature for the industry, but it is really what we need to think about, because we do need to, even if we're using AI tools that are going to be understanding customer intent, we need to be able to match that with the right information. Because a lot of people say, well, just feed the knowledge base. There's a company called Support GPT, and they are using large language models to understand intent. And they say, just point it to the database, to your knowledge base. Well, assume a knowledge base, right? I mean, many times there's gaps in the knowledge. There's where you don't have an easy way to find it. And the better we structure this information, the better it can be retrieved, right? Anytime you're using any kind of a retrieval mechanism, and really a chatbot is a channel. It's a channel to the data and the content and the knowledge. Let's see. I have a quick question here, or comment. If you do not have complete organizational buy-in, engineering and R&D will remain siloed. Is there still enough MDM value in 60 or 75% of the content? Here's what I've experienced. Once you do that for one part of the organization, the other parts of the organization want in, right? So you can be an exemplar, you can show them how it's being done, you can show capabilities, and then say, hey, if they can do it as well, great. You know, they don't need your process, but if they can't do it, then they're going to need to come on board. Thoughts about that, Dan?
Yeah, so I worked for a Fortune 50 retailer where we did not have a good MDM process. And I took that call 2 days before Thanksgiving saying that one of our experiences was broken. Sometimes getting 5% of your data into MDM or getting 5% of your structures around an MDM program are better than zero. And as I said, as Al said, it'll be additive, it'll grow over time. But if you can eliminate 2, 3, 4 of those all hands emergency calls 2 days before a big event, that will pay for itself fairly quickly, just in the trust you'll be able to develop with the higher levels of your organization.
Yeah, that's great. And again, folks, if we're answering your questions thoroughly, let us know. If we're not, let us know. We like the dialogue, we like the exchange. So I talked about component content, and I talked about create once, publish everywhere. Well, here's where this works, right? It's like Mad Libs, right? Where you fill in the adjective, you fill in the noun, the verb, right? You have a structure, and then you have building blocks. You have like Legos that you're changing in and out to try to optimize the experience and optimize toward an objective, which is click-throughs or downloads or purchases, conversions, whatever it might be. But the idea here is that we have multivariant testing across multiple elements. So we could switch out the hero image. We could have a different value proposition. We could have different messaging. We can have different calls to action. This is where componentization will allow you to optimize that experience, because you can use orchestration engines and machine learning to be able to do that. So the point here is that when you build this structure, this has lots of downstream effects. You're not duplicating content all over the place, and you're not trying to, you don't have inconsistent branding, you don't have inconsistent messaging, and you have the ability to do this kind of optimization. So I told you before I was going to spend a little bit more time on the governance and the metrics. And here's where, that little thumbnail I showed you before, where I said I tied all together with metrics and governance. Everybody wants to know, how is this going to increase revenue, right? But we're working in the weeds. We're working on content, on data, on master data. And it's very difficult to show that direct impact on revenue. But what we need to do is we need to say whatever the content is, whatever the data is, that supports a process. We can have scorecards around the completeness of the data, on the fill rate, on the appropriateness of the quality of the data or the content. And again, switch out whatever term you need here. It's the same idea. We have content or data quality scorecards. We can look at our product catalog and understand fill rates. Then we need to say, well, what process will that content or that data support, right? So when we're doing a master data initiative, we need a baseline around the quality of the data, the completeness of the data, the appropriateness of the data. And then we need to link that to a business process and say, how is this going to support that process? So if I change our content, or if I change our search, if I change something, or I optimize it, and I can optimize on a category level, are we going to see a change in a business process? Are we going to see a different indicator? And this is what's really important, is having that linkage. But the business process supports an objective, and this is an outcome. And this is the level where I'm always quoting Chris Penn. This is the level which you either get bonused or you catalyze a resume generating event. I love the way he put that, right? Because again, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you're being measured on outcomes. And that has to align and support the enterprise strategy. And we need that linkage up and down the food chain. I'm curious as to how many people have seen this one before, but I do use it quite a bit. But you can shift in and out whatever those processes are, whatever that data and content is, and whatever those outcomes are. And we can also do this across the entire customer journey. This is why we focus the master data initiative, the product data initiative, the content initiatives, and in the context of the customer journey, right? Because we have departments, we have each stage of the journey. We have departments that are responsible for that. We have processes within those departments. We have accountabilities within those parts of the organization, and we have the data and technologies. And we can take that layer cake and flip it upside down. And we have data and technology scorecards, process scorecards, and outcome scorecards. And this allows us to truly be data-driven. This allows us to really enable metrics-driven governance. Dan, what are your thoughts about this? Because I do hear people say, that's great, but it's not practical for my organization. But what are your thoughts here?
Well,
Because of the
people,
data.
People that are looking at it from an impractical perspective are the kind of people that see the problem, but haven't been able to see the solution yet. If you go through this process and try to build solutions, it's easier to then be able to implement these kinds of lifecycle technologies. It's when you only come with a problem that you can't see where the solution is going to be that this kind of starts to break down.
That's a really good point. And I think, we have to start with baselines, right? We have to start with what's that current state and what can we measure? What are we instrumented for? Usually a data quality assessment can be done, using the tools that you have and using some other methodologies. You can look at content, you can audit it, you can inventory it, you can do a lot of different things. The same thing with product data, the same thing with customer data. You can assess that. And then you need to say, well, what are we supporting? What process? What, and then what outcome? And it's really starting to connect those things together. Just doing on the other slide, the lowest level connected to the process can be difficult for some large organizations. And, it took a couple of years for one of our large clients to get there, but they did get there. And this is where you can really start to show ROI on these initiatives. There's a question here. If the data quality is high according to the metrics provided, answers to customer questions and usage will be provided and save time. Do we equate performance, function, time, productivity, et cetera, as money-saving events? Now, yes, because again, at the end of the day, usually customer satisfaction, performance, the actual changes that you're doing will reduce either calls to the call center, do increase call deflection, reduce those calls in the first place, give customers a better experience, and save time internally, right, for the people that are actually doing this work to enable this external experience. So time savings, but there's other process metrics. There's a whole metrics-driven governance playbook and scorecard and so on. And I do workshops on this, but the point is looking at that customer journey, understanding what is a critical tool and process, and then understanding what that baseline is. And then there's the linkage to a causal event. You just have to say, when I change my hierarchy, what impact is that going to have on conversions, on findability, on user experience, on customer satisfaction? But yes, changes, time and productivity are money saving. The challenge with that is that executives will say, can we reduce our headcount, right? Or are people going to do something else with the time? And obviously you want to free them up for higher value added activities, but we are losing a lot of expertise in organizations, right? Through attrition. And Applied Materials did this. They saved $50 million a year in actual field service costs, right? Because people were not reduced the amount of time they spent looking for answers from 16 hours a week to 8 hours a week across 3,000 field service techs. And so that does improve the productivity significantly. And then you can do more with less. And what are your thoughts about measurement and what resonates with executives?
Well, there's a couple of things. One of the sales people where I work constantly talks about you can't change the demand for your product, but you can change your market share. And if you're just looking at it from a productivity or a time perspective, yes, time to launch is very important in the product space, and being able to get these technologies in place help you with time to launch. But being able to generate market share involves the people that now have more time available based off of these improved processes and the improved technology can then be optimizing to say my data quality has gone from high to exceptional. Because if you're always thinking your data is high and you don't have to do anything, you're falling behind a data maturity curve. So using the pieces that you're talking about with productivity, with time to launch, and using those to get to an optimization, which helps conversion, which gets you to bigger market share, should be the goal as an entire response as just opposed to individual little pieces of a response.
Excellent insight. Again, and how do you take market share? By making it easier for customers to solve their problems and by understanding their needs. And this is how you compete with the Amazons of the world, right? Or the Walmarts of the world, or whoever, by making sure you are understanding that customer need in detail. And when we start thinking about how we do this, we have proactive and reactive personalization. And Dan, you were kind of observing this when we were going through our run through. So I'll let you take this and talk a little bit about it.
Sure. So when you're talking about reactive personalization, it's always in retrospective. You're looking at a conversion level, or you're looking at a trend, and you're trying to chase what is going on to try to catch up to what exactly the problem is, or the latest trend that's going on. And you're changing content, you're changing data to match an individual trend. When you're talking about proactive personalization, you're using all of your data sources to get to an optimized experience. And Seth has called this, I'm sure everybody's seen this, the real-time digital body language. That's when you're not changing data to match a trend, but you're using data itself as the change mechanism to be proactive instead of waiting to find out what the trend is and then being a follow-on to that trend.
And the issue here is also, you do have to be reactive in some cases, right? You do need to look at historical actions. But, the goal when we think about this proactively is to dynamically display products and content and supporting information based on the data exhaust from the rest of the experience stack, right? Your other tools are telling you something about the customer. They're giving you signals. They're telling you whether the customer is responding to something or not, or what message is working. You're getting that signal. And the question is, how do you optimize your content to respond to that signal? And so here's when we talk about digital body language, it's the attributes, it's the descriptors, it's what you get from first party data. This is helping describe context for people. We describe it using metadata. We understand who you are and what your interests are and what your role is and what industry you're in and so on. And we can kind of think of this from a fast-moving and slow-moving metadata perspective. And we do this by collecting the signals that are instrumented throughout that customer journey. And I broke this up into explicit, objective, applied, implicit, subjective, derived. Don't worry about those labels. Think of it as slow-moving and fast-moving, right? I call it static and dynamic, but it's understanding that journey. It's identifying the details of the customer and then defining what content they need depending upon where they are in their journey. And this is where we get into high fidelity journey models, right? When we start looking at the dynamic presentation of information, what we need to do that with is that customer model. So we have static or slow moving metadata, right? This is the stuff that we know about our customers that's not going to change every day. This is industry, role, interest, firmographics, and so on, right? That stuff doesn't change real time. But then as people go through their journey, they do change the metadata model. This is the fast moving metadata, right? It changes that model. It changes. This is where we use things like customer data platforms to sample that experience and to understand those signals as they do different things, as they compare products, as they download things, as they open email offers, as they click through the site. That is the dynamic customer model. The campaign responses, the click-throughs, all of those recent purchases, new goals, all of those things change the metadata model of the customer. And that's the dynamic, that's the high fidelity journey model, right? It's representing the customer needs in metadata terms. As a journey model is usually a pretty picture and a map, but your systems can't respond to that. They can respond to metadata. So the way this would work is I download a white paper, I have top of the funnel content, that comes from my knowledge architecture. That's an expertise from a brand manager. That's the expertise of who knows what's going to draw customers in. Our customer data platform will consolidate that signal. Maybe there are other signals based on the static metadata, the slow metadata, and it'll make a recommendation. And it'll tell the content management system and the product information management system that this customer is giving us these signals, and let's make a recommendation. And the same thing happens when we're comparing products, right? That's another piece of content that indicates a stage, and that will change the user's metadata model. This is middle of the funnel content according to our expertise, our human expertise. And again, same thing, I'm influencing what recommendation I make and what content that I prepare or present. Same thing, installation guide, that's post-purchase content, troubleshooting, et cetera. And again, I can use that to say, oh, great, they're buying this. Let's try to give them an offer for, another type of another type of product, but also make sure we're giving them the information they need, right? And again, post-purchase content. This is where we talk about, marketing content and product recommendations and content recommendations. All of these things are happening based on that real-time monitoring of the digital body language. Your thoughts, Dan?
I agree with this all. I would challenge people to understand that Amazon doesn't care about the product they're selling you in the cart today. They care about how they're going to get you the next product you're going to buy. If you're not using strategies like this to compete with Amazon, you're not competing with Amazon, because as much as you care about the purchase a customer is going to make today, the next purchase and the purchase after that are vitally important to build brand loyalty.
Absolutely. And again, this is how you compete, by understanding that customer in detail and being able to present the information that they need when they need it. And again, when we start looking at this, it really begins with that architecture, right? Product data, content, customer experience, and knowledge of how you solve problems is really where your value is. That's how you're competing. You're competing on knowledge and you're competing on your solutions. But if it's a mess, you can't automate things. You can't automate a mess. You can't automate what you don't understand. People say, oh, that's so complex. No, it's hidden complexity. That is behind the scenes. I like to say my iPhone, my magical device, is very simple to use, but it's very complex in the back end. We have to have clean data. We have to have reference data. We have to have good product data and customer data and content. We need to understand the journeys and the data sources and the owners all along that journey. And that's where we're also defining the governance processes and the curation. So when you want to try to get started on these things, and we only have a couple of minutes left, we have a couple of slides, it's mapping the customer journey, right? It's looking at that customer life cycle internally and externally, right? Because people think internally, this is how we look at the customer. You have to also look externally. Look at serving the data sources that support each stage of that journey and focus on the most important technologies in that stage of the journey, and determining whether the data is sufficient, whether the health and quality of the data are aligned with the importance of that journey stage and the tools and technologies that are supporting that journey stage. And then, of course, we need to identify the accountabilities. Who is going to be responsible for this? Who is going to get bonused or catalyze a resume generating event? Who owns the process? Who owns the outcome? Where is this important? And get those baseline metrics for each of those layers for that particular stage. And then project the impact. If we have an improved process or user experience, improved, supported by master data, what is that going to mean? Well, that's some extrapolation, but get the business side involved in that, get finance involved in that, so that everything looks appropriate. Don't do top-down, large-scale MDM programs without a reference point. Select the stage of the journey that is performing below what you need, and then focus on the data and the processes in that stage. Define the customer attributes each stage, because that describes the intent. And then experiment with product recommendations based on attributes, right? Changing assortments, surfacing products. That's all based on customer personas and customer use cases and journeys. And then you can cleanse that data as necessary, right? Include content modeling, include metrics. And the point that Dan made before, AI is part of the solution. It is not the entire solution. Dan, any other final comments? We're right at the top of the hour here.
Real quick, document everything as much as you can. That's vitally important for continuity. And last thing, implementing MDM is not like implementing a payroll program. Payroll program, you update your tax tables once a day. once a year. This will be an ever evolving, living technology that you have to nurture to get the best value out of.
So I have a couple of slides for additional reading. We're right at the top of the hour, so I'm going to finish now. But there's more reference materials, and be sure to check out our podcast. And of course, here is our contact information. Thank you, Dan, so much. Thanks to everybody who joined today, Carolyn behind the scenes, and all the folks that make this possible. And thank you to our sponsors once again. Have a good day, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.